Now, someone with a very worldly view of trade is Dr. Ken Courtis, chairman of Starfort Investment Holdings, normally based between Japan and New York. But he was in Sydney this week. I asked him first if he thought there could be a deal between Trump and China.
Can there be a deal? Yes, there can be a deal. There will be a deal. Trump's main concern is 2020, November the 8th, being re-elected. And he will do virtually anything to get re-elected, and if it means doing a deal, as I think it does, he will do a deal. But Trump's underlying proclivities are very much in this protectionist mode. He's been talking this way for 20, 25 years. So the 2020 elections will be a hiatus, and then we'll be back to more conflict. The real issue, Tiki, is that America doesn't have enough savings. And as long as they don't have enough savings, they're going to have to borrow from the rest of the world, which means they have a big deficit, external deficit. And I don't see anything that's going to change that. So we're going to expect, and I think, see lots of trade friction over the next decade.
How do you see trade emerging in terms of blocks, or will it be global trade that we all work towards?
What's really interesting is that in putting this pressure on China, Trump is forcing the Chinese to, in a sense, export part of their surplus with America to Southeast Asia. So all the Chinese companies and foreign companies operating in China are all now trying to figure out how much of their production they can put in Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, and export from there to the U.S. So what's going to happen is that that's going to drive the integration even faster of Southeast Asia with China, such that, who knows, by 2030, 2040, Southeast Asia will look like the Caribbean for America, or for China, like the Caribbean is for the United States.
But you'll have these regional blocks of trade.
I think that's where we're going, away from globalization, as we've seen it, to three big blocks: Europe, North and South America, China with Southeast Asia. And if this famous One Belt, One Road business really works out, Central Asia and Africa will be integrated into largely into the Chinese bloc.
We had Morgan Stanley's James Gorman here this last week, and now he thinks Trump really puts a lot of store in what Wall Street thinks. Do you agree? Where's Wall Street going? Is that a good thing?
Well, if we don't have a deal, the stock market's not going up, it's going down. And Trump constantly is saying that he's the man to drive the stock market higher. And so to square the circle, he's got to do a deal on trade. Otherwise, people who run all of these big U.S. corporations, they aren't going to support him in the election.
You are quite optimistic about how Wall Street's going to go this year.
Well, I think of it this way. The Fed probably will cut rates. I'm looking for a 50 basis point cut in rates, so down from where we are to around 1.75 for the Fed's fund rate. 2-year, 10-year bonds, I'm seeing around 2.5%. over the next year. Inflation is nowhere. So 2.5% 10-year bonds, 1.75% Fed's fund rate. I could see that we'd have 2.5% growth for the year, which would mean profits will go up. Price-earnings ratio today is around 15.5 for the New York stock market. I could see it under those conditions going up to 19 or 20, which then means a 25% rise in the stock market between now and the end of next year, which would be just on time for Donald Trump's re-election.
Ken, you have this extraordinary window on the global auto industry, and in particular having worked for Carlos Ghosn, who ran the great Renault-Nissan alliance. He's now in Japan. He's locked up. This must be the talk of the town over there at the G20 meeting. What is your insight? What's behind this incredible move by the Japanese government?
The move to arrest Carlos Ghosn.
Yes.
And I think there are several levels that we could look at this, Tiki. There's the internal corporate politics. Ghosn wasn't happy with the way the company was being managed after he gave up executive control, and he was ready to replace the CEO. So, you know, the old Japan crowd that's still there, because you can't fire people in Japan, they wanted to take back control of the company. I think, secondly, obviously, there are politics involved. The auto industry is going through tremendous change. Electric vehicle, autonomous driving, new types of distribution, new competitors that weren't there a few years ago. All of a sudden, maybe Google becomes a big player in the car industry. So the cards are going to be reshuffled. And the Japanese government and the French government both want to make sure that they have a big piece of the car industry.
So they had a nationalistic view, whereas Carlos Ghosn wanted the great global alliance.
Global Motors is what he was in the process of creating. There are 8 companies in the alliance, maybe 9 if Fiat eventually joins it.
Yeah.
So that the politics are deeply involved, and the two governments, whatever they say, they're behind all of this. Number 3, there's a basic issue of human rights. Whatever the reality of the charges are against Ghosn, and they look pretty odd, some of the charges, this man spent 108 days in solitary confinement. That means no telephone, no communications, no watch, no pencil, no paper, no calendar.
Can't even see his wife.
Sleeping on the floor, no heat in the cell. You know, Tokyo gets cold in the wintertime. Subject to interrogations at any time, day or night. With 14...
Is this normal in Japan?
It's normal if you get caught up in their legal system. If Japan was if Ghosn was a Japanese, yeah, I would bet a lot that he would have never been arrested.
Yes.
But they had to decapitate him and his management in order to, in this fight for power with the French government over control of this auto
So
group.
what is Emmanuel Macron's role in all of this?
I think his role is very important because he set in train, if we go back to 4 or 5 years to 2014, an operation where he increased the French state control of Renault from 15% to 40%. And all of a sudden, the Japanese said, this is backdoor nationalization by the French government of our company, because Renault owns the majority of Nissan. So they reacted. And to reestablish peace, Macron, who was then minister, against all kinds of advice, accepted conditions which basically today have allowed the people at Nissan and the Japanese government to take his investment, or the French government and Renault's investment in Nissan, as hostage, because they've committed never to vote against a resolution presented to the shareholders by the board. So effectively, they've lost control of this.
So fast forwarding, extraordinary, in the last few days, the French finance minister now says Renault could bring Carlos Ghosn to court themselves over this alleged, 11 million euros of dubious expenses, they say. But equally, we've now seen that this week the French government has somehow torpedoed the Chrysler-Fiat deal with Renault. How did that happen?
The French government is a serial non-completer of deals. They've effectively blown up the Nissan-Renault alliance. The peak is over for that group of companies, in my view now. They've blown up this Fiat deal because you have to give us this, you have to give us that, we want these people on the board, we want you to commit to keep him seat.
Again, it's a control issue.
It's a control issue. Like they blew up the attempt of Renault to take over Volvo many years ago. The French government is one of the most unimaginative, clumsy, and short-sighted shareholders in the world, and they've proved it again.
Extraordinary story, Dr. Ken Courtis. Great to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you.